The wine spread across the marble floor like blood, dark red against the pristine white stone. Isabella stood over it with her arms crossed, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at the mess like she was directing a servant. "Clean this mess up," she ordered, her voice dripping with the kind of entitled authority she'd perfected since marrying my father 2 years ago. I looked down at the spilled wine, then back at her. "Excuse me. You heard me. Clean it up. That's what you're good for." Dad laughed from his position on the leather sofa, where he sat with Isabella's twin daughters, Madison and Taylor. The girls, both 19 and clearly enjoying the show, giggled behind their champagne flutes. "Come on, Sophia," Madison said with mock sweetness. "It's not like you have anything better to do." Taylor nodded eagerly. "Yeah, and you're so good at domestic stuff." The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fireplace. I stood in the middle of what had once been my family's living room, looking at the people who had systematically erased every trace of my mother's presence from this house. My mother's photos, replaced with Isabella's family portraits. My mother's furniture, donated to charity and replaced with Isabella's taste in modern elegance. My mother's garden, torn up and replanted with Isabella's preferred roses. Even my childhood bedroom had been converted into Madison's walk-in closet. "Sophia," Dad's voice had that warning tone I remembered from childhood. "Don't make this into a bigger deal than it needs to be." I looked at him, really looked at him. At 52, Dad was still handsome in that silver fox way that had probably attracted Isabella. But his eyes were different now. Colder. More calculating. The man who used to read me bedtime stories had been replaced by someone who seemed to view his own daughter as an inconvenience. "I knocked over the wine by accident," Isabella said, her voice taking on that false sweetness she used when she wanted to appear reasonable. "It's not a big deal. Just grab some paper towels." "From where?" I asked quietly. "What? Where should I get the paper towels? From the kitchen that you renovated and don't allow me to use? Or from the cleaning supply closet that you had locked?" Isabella's smile tightened. "Don't be dramatic, Sophia. You're 24 years old. You can figure out how to clean up a simple spill. Like how I figured out how to pay for college when you convinced Dad to stop my tuition payments." "That's enough," Dad said sharply. "Isabella didn't convince me of anything. I made a business decision about resource allocation." "Resource allocation," I repeated. "Is that what you call your daughter?" Madison snorted. "God, you're so melodramatic. It's like just clean up the wine and stop being weird about it." Taylor nodded. "Seriously, we're trying to have a nice family evening." Family evening. I almost laughed. I looked around the room one more time. At the oil painting Isabella had commissioned of herself and her daughters, displayed prominently where my mother's portrait used to hang. At the new furniture arranged to face away from the garden my mother had spent 15 years cultivating. At the people who had moved into my childhood home and decided I was the one who didn't belong. Then I looked directly at the security camera mounted in the corner near the ceiling. And I smiled. "Is there something funny about this situation?" Isabella asked, following my gaze to the camera. "Not funny exactly," I said, still looking at the lens. "Just ironic." "What's ironic?" I finally looked back at her. "You want me to clean up your mess in my own house." The room went very quiet. "What did you say?" Dad's voice was dangerously low. "I said this is my house." Isabella laughed. A sharp, brittle sound. "Sophia, sweetie, I think you're confused. This is your father's house. Which makes it my house now that we're married." "Actually," I said, walking over to the mantelpiece where Isabella had displayed her collection of crystal figurines, "it's not Dad's house anymore." I picked up one of the figurines, a delicate swan that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Sophia, put that down," Dad said, standing up. "This is interesting," I said, examining the swan. "Did you know that when you bought this, the transaction went through Meridian Holdings LLC? "So what?" Isabella snapped. "Meridian Holdings is my company." The silence stretched for several seconds. "What company?" Dad asked slowly. "The company that owns this house. And the vineyard in Napa. And the penthouse in Manhattan. And about 47 other properties across 6 states. Madison's champagne flute slipped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor next to the wine stain. "That's impossible," Isabella said, but her voice had lost its confidence. You're a college graduate with no job. You live in that tiny apartment downtown. I live in a tiny apartment downtown because it's close to my office. And because I like small spaces. They're cozy. I set the crystal swan back on the mantel and turned to face them. The office for Meridian Holdings, by the way, is the building Dad has been renting space in for his consulting firm. Has been for the past 18 months. Dad's face had gone very pale. Sophia, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you've been paying rent to me, Dad. $12,000 a month for that corner office with the nice view. Though I have to say you've been a very reliable tenant. That's impossible, he whispered. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. Would you like to see the deposit records? How could you possibly own a real estate empire worth $1.2 billion? I finished. It's funny you should ask. I walked over to the window that overlooked the garden. My mother's garden that Isabella had destroyed and replanted. Do you remember when I was 16 and I started that little website design business? You said it was cute that I was learning about computers and such. Sophia. I made my first $1 million when I was 17, Dad. Selling a social media platform I'd built in my bedroom. You know, the bedroom that's now Madison's closet. Madison made a small choking sound. By the time I graduated high school, I'd turned that $1 million into $15 million through cryptocurrency investments. You probably don't remember, but I tried to tell you about it at graduation dinner. You said you didn't want to hear about my internet fantasies. I turned back to face them. Isabella had sunk onto the sofa, her perfect composure finally cracking. In college, I took those $15 million and started buying distressed properties. Fixing them up. Selling them. Buying more. It was like a very expensive video game, except the points were actual dollars. Sophia, Dad's voice was barely audible. Why didn't you tell me? I tried to. Multiple times. But you were always too busy or too tired or too focused on your own business problems. And then Mom got sick. The room went dead silent. When Mom was in the hospital, I offered to pay for the experimental treatment. Do you remember what you told me? Dad's mouth opened but no sound came out. You told me to stop being ridiculous. You said college students don't have money for medical treatments. You said I needed to focus on my studies and let the adults handle adult problems. I walked over to the bookshelf where Isabella had replaced my mother's novels with decorating magazines. So I handled it myself. I set up a charitable foundation and anonymously paid for Mom's treatment. $250,000. I also paid for the home nursing care, the special equipment, the experimental medications that insurance wouldn't cover. That was anonymous? Dad whispered. The Meridian Foundation. Named after Mom's maiden name. She never knew it was me, but at least she got the care she needed. Isabella finally found her voice. If you have so much money, why are you living like what? Like a normal person? I shrugged. As I am a normal person. I just happen to be very good at making money. But the apartment, the clothes, the car are all perfectly fine. I don't need a mansion to be happy. Though apparently I own one anyway. I gestured around the room. This house, by the way, went into foreclosure about 6 months after Mom died. Dad's business was struggling, the medical bills had drained the savings, and the mortgage payments were 3 months behind. Dad stared at me. The bank said there was an error in their system. That the account had been paid in full. There was no error. I bought the house from the bank. Then I bought out the remaining mortgage. Then I set up a fake rental agreement so you could keep living here without feeling embarrassed. You what? For the past 2 years, Dad, you've been living in my house rent-free while I pretended to be your struggling college student daughter. Taylor spoke for the first time in several minutes. Why would you do that? Because he's my father. And despite everything, I love him. I looked at Dad, who seemed to be having trouble processing this information. Even when you stopped returning my calls after Mom's funeral. Even when you married Isabella 6 months later without inviting me to the wedding. Even when you let her redecorate Mom's house and erase every trace of her existence. Sophia. Even when you chose your new stepdaughters over your actual daughter, I still loved you enough to make sure you had a home. Isabella stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Richard, she's lying. She has to be lying. Am I? I pulled out my phone again and opened a different app. This is the security system for the house. I can control everything from here. I tapped the screen. The lights dimmed then returned to normal. That's the lighting system. Another tap. Air conditioning. The temperature dropped noticeably. And this, I tapped once more, controls the door locks. There was a soft clicking sound from the front door. The doors are now locked, I said conversationally. Only I have the override code. Dad stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Sophia, I don't understand. If you could afford all this, why didn't you just help? Why didn't you tell me? I did help. I saved your house, Dad. I kept your business afloat by being a generous landlord. I've been helping for 2 years. But why in secret? I looked at him for a long moment. Because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I couldn't do anything for you. The words hung in the air like a challenge. And what I learned is that when you thought I was just your poor, struggling daughter, you didn't want me around. You chose a new family. You let them move into Mom's house and erase her memory. You let them treat me like hired help. That's not, we never. Isabella just ordered me to clean wine off the floor of my own house, Dad. Madison and Taylor laughed about it. And you sat there and watched it happen. Dad looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. His gaze landed on the spot where my mother's portrait used to hang, now occupied by Isabella's family photo. Oh God, he whispered. Sophia, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. You didn't realize what? That I'm a human being who deserves basic respect? Or that I might actually be capable of more than you assumed? Isabella stepped forward, her face flushed. Now wait just a minute. You can't blame us for not knowing about your secret business empire. If you had just been honest from the beginning. If I had been honest from the beginning, would you have treated me better? Or would you have just been nicer to my face while planning how to get access to my money? Isabella's mouth snapped shut. That's what I thought. I walked back to where the wine was still spreading across the marble floor. You know what, Isabella? You're right. I should clean this up. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. Hi Maria. It's Sophia. Yes, I'm at the house. Could you send the cleaning crew over? There's been a spill. Oh, nothing major. Just some people who made a mess they can't clean up themselves. I hung up and looked at my family. They'll be here in 20 minutes. Professional cleaners. They're very good at removing stains that seem impossible to get out. Sophia, Dad said quietly, what happens now? Now you have a choice. I walked to the center of the room, standing in the space where my mother used to practice piano before Isabella had it removed to make room for a larger television. You can acknowledge that you've treated me terribly and work to rebuild our relationship. Or you can continue to prioritize your new family over your daughter. Of course we want to rebuild. I'm not finished. Dad fell silent. If you choose to rebuild, it means acknowledging what you've done. It means respecting my mother's memory. It means treating me like your daughter instead of an inconvenience. I looked at Isabella and her daughters. And it means everyone in this room apologizes for the last 2 years of casual cruelty. Isabella's face flushed red. Apologize? For what? We didn't know. You didn't know I was wealthy. But you knew I was his daughter. You knew I just lost my mother. You knew I was grieving and alone. And you decided I was disposable. That's not how we saw it. How you saw it doesn't matter. How you treated me does. The doorbell rang. That'll be the cleaning crew, I said, unlocking the front door with my phone. They're very discreet. They won't say anything about what they see here tonight. A team of 4 professional cleaners entered with their equipment. They nodded politely and immediately went to work on the wine stain, moving around us like we were furniture. So, I said, watching them work, what's it going to be? Dad looked at Isabella, then at Madison and Taylor, then back at me. Sophia, sweetheart, he stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I've been a terrible father. Yes, you have. I let my grief over losing your mother cloud my judgment. I thought bringing Isabella and the girls into our lives would help me move forward, but instead I just replaced you. I didn't respond. I'm sorry, he said finally. I'm so sorry. Are you sorry because you hurt me or because you found out I'm rich? He flinched. I'm sorry because I failed you. Money doesn't change the fact that you're my daughter and I love you. I studied his face. What about the house? What about it? Do you want to keep living here? He looked around the room again. Honestly, this house is full of your mother's memories and we've destroyed most of them. I don't think I can face that anymore. Isabella gasped. Richard, you can't be serious. This house is worth millions. It's not our house, he said quietly. It never was. We've been guests here and we've been terrible guests. One of the cleaners finished with the wine stain. The marble was spotless, like nothing had ever been spilled. Perfect, I said to the cleaner. Thank you. After they left, the house fell quiet again. So what happens now? Madison asked in a small voice. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was 19, the same age I'd been when I made my first million. But instead of building something, she'd spent the last 2 years tearing down someone else's life for sport. Now you learn to take care of yourselves, I said. What do you mean? Taylor asked. I mean the free ride is over. Dad, you can stay in the guest house until you find a new place. I'll give you 60 days. And us. Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. You have until tomorrow night to pack your things. Tomorrow? Sophia, that's not enough time. It's more time than you gave me when you converted my bedroom into a closet. Isabella opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Where are we supposed to go? Madison asked. I don't know. Maybe back to your mother's family? Maybe get jobs? Figure it out. Jobs. Taylor looked horrified. Yes, jobs. Those things most people do to earn money. I walked toward the front door, then paused. Oh, and Isabella? That wine you spilled. It was a 1982 Bordeaux from my mother's collection. One of the last bottles Dad was saving for special occasions. It was worth about $3,000. Isabella went pale. I'll have the replacement cost deducted from your security deposit. What security deposit? She whispered. The one you're going to pay for the damage you've done to my house over the past 2 years. I'll have the itemized list sent to you tomorrow. I opened the front door and stepped into the cool evening air. Sophia, wait, Dad called out. Where are you going? Home. To my tiny apartment with the cozy living room and the pictures of Mom on every surface. When will I see you again? I turned back to look at him one last time. When you've figured out how to be my father again instead of just someone who shares my DNA. And I walked away from the house where I'd grown up, the house I'd secretly saved, the house where I'd been treated like a servant by people living off my generosity. Behind me, I could hear Isabella starting to cry. 3 months later, Dad called me. He'd found a small apartment across town and a job with a local firm. He'd been going to grief counseling and wanted to know if I'd like to have dinner sometime. Just us, he said. No one else. I want to talk about your mother. And about you. And about how I can be better. I met him at a small restaurant downtown. We talked for 3 hours. He asked about my business, really asked, and listened to the answers. He told me stories about Mom that I'd never heard. He apologized again, and this time it felt real. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. Isabella and her daughters moved to Florida, where Isabella's sister lived. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Madison had gotten a job at a retail store and Taylor was taking community college classes. They never did pay the security deposit. But 6 months after that dinner with Dad, I received a handwritten letter from Madison. It was 3 pages long and mostly consisted of apologies. At the end she wrote, I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to realize we were horrible to you. You didn't deserve any of it. She included a check for $50. It's not much, she wrote, but it's the first money I ever earned myself. I wanted you to have it. I never cashed the check. But I kept the letter. A year later, Dad and I had dinner once a month. We were rebuilding slowly, carefully, both of us learning how to be family again. He never asked me for money and I never offered it unless he truly needed help. The house where I grew up sold to a lovely family with 3 young children. I watched from across the street as they moved in, the kids running through Mom's garden, which I'd had restored to exactly how she designed it. Sometimes I drive by in the evenings and see them having dinner through the kitchen window. The father reads to his kids in the living room where Dad used to read to me. The mother tends the garden my mother planted. It's exactly what that house was meant for. And somewhere in Florida, Isabella is learning to clean up her own messes.